Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. It's a nice chilly morning here in Santa Fe. I'm seeing that folks are still logging on, but we are at 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's program. My name is Molly, and I'm the Adult Programs Manager here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and I just want to thank you for being here for another installment of our Mornings with O'Keeffe. I would like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I'd now like to extend a thank you to our members and donors who are here today, because without support from you, events and programs like this would not be possible. So if you enjoyed this program and the other program offerings that we have at the O'Keeffe Museum, please consider becoming a member today. You can learn more by visiting gokm.org/membership. Throughout the talk, please place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. For the duration of the lecture, the chat has been disabled. Please note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum's website in a week or two. Captions in both English and Spanish will be available. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this morning, Elizabeth Ehrnst. Liz is the head of research collections and services at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, where she strategically leads and oversees the research collections and service department, including developing and maintaining archival and library collections, research and reference access services, outreach, and exhibitions, which she'll be talking about today. She holds a Master of Library Science degree from Indiana University, specializing in art librarianship and digital libraries, and has been working with the field of archives and librarianship for over 2 decades. And today, Liz is going to share about a new exhibition that is now on view in the Research Center Library. And I am just so excited, and I know that you all will be very thrilled to learn about what she's put together. So without any further delay, Liz, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Molly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, great. Hope you're all seeing that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Happy New Year. As Molly said, I am Liz Ehrnst. I'm the head of research collections and services at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, where I basically oversee the library and archive. And I'm going to share a little bit about an exhibition that's currently installed in the museum's reading room called Modernist Circle. But first, I'm going to start out with an overview of the Michael S. Engel Family Foundation Library and Archive at the museum. So the Engel Library and Archive has a wealth of information and materials pertaining to Georgia O'Keeffe, as you can imagine, but also more broadly to modernism. And we have the usual library materials, books, periodicals, magazines, vertical files, research databases, but we also collect other unique items such as manuscript collections. This would be like O'Keeffe's correspondence and photographs. The museum's institutional and historical records, oral histories, and library special collections, which includes Georgia O'Keeffe's personal library. We are open to the public Tuesday through Friday by appointment, and you can schedule appointments online. And at the end, I will put up a slide that gives more information on how to contact us and find resources, a website, email, and phone number. So we do have rotating exhibitions in the library reading room, and these are usually annually rotating. So once a year, we bring out materials that largely feature library and archival collections, but as well, we put in some of the artworks. There's always a few artworks, and Georgia O'Keeffe's artist materials are on display. So the current exhibition and focus of this talk is on the community of influential American modern artists and writers that Georgia O'Keeffe was a part of. And the exhibition features some rarely seen works from the museum's collection and materials primarily from O'Keeffe's personal library and archive that are both by and about the artists and writers in this creative circle. So before we go any further in, a really quick timeline of O'Keeffe and modernism, early modernism. So in 1913, the Armory Show, which was also known as the International Exhibition of Modern Art, happens. And this was really important as it was the first large exhibition of modern art in America. And at this time, O'Keeffe is actually teaching in Texas, but she's spending her summers at the University of Virginia, working as Ellen Bement's teaching assistant. And she's reading books suggested by Bement, such as Jerome Eddy's Cubist and Post-Impressionism and Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And he suggests these to her before she travels to New York in the fall of 1914, when she's enrolled at Teachers College, Columbia University. So through the spring of 1915, we know that she is viewing modernist exhibitions and she's continuing her reading because she writes her friend Anita Politzer regularly about this, and they're regularly discussing what they're looking at and reading. And by late 1915, she's working on her groundbreaking charcoal abstractions. And in 1916, she begins corresponding with Alfred Stieglitz and showing in group shows at his gallery 291. Her first one-person show is in April 1917, and in 1918 she moves from Texas to New York, where she moves in with Stieglitz, and he offers to underwrite a year of painting. So she becomes further acquainted with the world of avant-garde artists and authors and writers and critics through the galleries and publications of Alfred Stieglitz, who is a noted photographer, gallerist, and whom she was married to from 1924 to 1946. So perhaps less interested and immersed in the theories than others, O'Keeffe was well aware of the discourse around modernism, reading about modern art, viewing exhibitions recommended by her colleagues and mentors well before her involvement with Stieglitz. She's often associated with a select group of American artists known as the Stieglitz Circle, and these artists were committed to capturing and expressing and promoting a unique American identity in the early 20th century. And the group is really motivated and responding to the industrialization of American cities, as well as European avant-garde art and their contemporaries in Europe. So Stieglitz operated a series of galleries in which he exhibited and championed modern art and key artists in his circles. And in those galleries, artists and writers and people would gather to discuss and really promote the movement. The Little Galleries, which was later known as 291, started for a place for the latest developments in photography, but really ended up being one of the first American spaces for modern art, and works were coming from Europe, and he started to show a new group of painters there. At his subsequent galleries, he moved away from showing European modernism and really aimed to promote the art that he felt was uniquely American modern art. And this period brought some new voices into the conversation, particularly writers and critics seeking to define and promote the American arts, such as Paul Rosenfeld, Waldo Frank, Jean Toomer, Hart Crane, Sherwood Anderson, and all of these writers brought text and sought advice from Stieglitz and really worked together to promote each other. They did so by often making each other the subjects of their work and their writings, as the artists often did by creating portraits of one another. And here you see in this slide on the bottom is a photo from a exhibition, Beginnings and Landmarks, 291, 1905 to 1917. And this is actually a bit of a retrospective exhibition that was shown at 1937 at an American Place. And then on the right is a brochure from an exhibition at the Intimate Gallery, a seminal exhibition in 1925. Long title here, Alfred Stieglitz presents 7 Americans, 159 paintings, photographs, and things, recent and never before publicly shown by Arthur G. Dove, Marston Hartley, John Marin, Charles Demuth, Paul Strand, Georgia O'Keeffe, and Alfred Stieglitz. And these really become the heart of the Stieglitz Circle. So here you're seeing a couple of shots from the exhibition, things that are on view in the library. There's a watercolor on the left by John Marin and another watercolor by Arthur Dove, a oil painting by Marston Hartley, and a detail of some of the books from O'Keeffe's personal library that are on view. So Stieglitz and his creative circle not only promoted each other, but they also kind of set the rules for interpreting each other's work. Both troubling and beneficial for O'Keeffe was the promotion of her as the authentic female American artist. And they were arguing that O'Keeffe's work broke from the artistic traditions of her male counterparts and really produced work that was unique to her experience as a woman that the male artist could not convey. And this aligned with a foundational group thought that American artists must get to the essence of what they're depicting and express an authentic voice, and really would never excel without striking out on their own and doing something different than what their European counterparts were doing. O'Keeffe was repeatedly stereotyped in a gendered role as the definitive modern woman artist by the critics and colleagues and friends. Photographer and friend Paul Strand exclaimed that the work of Georgia O'Keeffe proclaims itself with all the power and precision of genius. It is not a delusion or imitation of the work of men, nor does it derive from European influences. Here in America, this amazing thing has happened. Here it is that the finest and most subtle perceptions of women have been crystallized for the first time in plastic terms, not only through line and form, but through color used with an expressiveness which it has never had before, which opens up a vast new horizon in the evolution of painting as incarnation of the human spirit. So for a period, actually, O'Keeffe worked well enough within the constructs of the Stieglitz circle of men, but she eventually grows tired of this talk, saying that, quote, "They didn't think much of what I was doing," and that she felt like an outsider. She remained generally receptive to the underlying American modernist message and engaged with the group regularly. She was always at the gallery. She was helping hang the other artists' exhibitions. She was socializing, corresponding, listening in always. However, she realizes that she needs friendships and artists outside this exclusive group, and she also is objecting to being labeled as a woman artist. And so now we're going to look a little closer at some of the individuals that are featured in the exhibition. Paul Rosenfeld was best known as a music critic, but also an art critic, and he was frequently in dialogue with Stieglitz and reviewing exhibitions at Stieglitz galleries, including O'Keeffe exhibitions. His book, Port of New York, Essays on 14 American Moderns, which you can see on the slide. It's open on the upper right there with a lengthy inscription. It was an important look at some of the key figures in American art in the time, and this was published in 1924. O'Keeffe later recalled in life that she really wasn't a fan of Rosenfeld's writing, saying that she wasn't a literary person and that she couldn't understand him and that he was, quote, too up in the air. But she did, however, enjoy him as a guest when he came to Lake George in the summers with her and Stieglitz. And he would spend a great deal of time writing and join them for meals and occasional adventures and walks. Basically, I think that she enjoyed him there because he was busy about his work and kept to himself, and she didn't have to spend time entertaining him or taking care of him like she did other guests sometimes. And so here you're looking on the left is a photograph taken by Stieglitz of the artist Charles Duncan, and O'Keeffe in the center there, and Rosenfeld on the right, taken in October 1920. And Stieglitz writes about it: "Lunch just over, Rosenfeld, Duncan, and I served Georgia on porch, like midsummer, roamed about the woods during the morning. All of us feel non-creative, so we're making sort of it a picnic day." And O'Keeffe said that, quote, Stieglitz really liked the idea of a group. He wanted something to come out of America, something really important, and he felt that you could not do that alone. And on the slide here, you see another photograph that is in the exhibition on the right. It's O'Keeffe, Rosenfeld, and Emile Zoller. And Zoller was another artist that O'Keeffe met through actually Marston Hartley, and he didn't really exhibit at Stieglitz galleries. He actually operated a little bit more as a gallery assistant, helping to hang shows and things like that. But he was a regular visitor at Lake George. The photo is mounted to a piece of paper that reads, "Me and the flag. Yes, Emile Zoller and the flag. July 4th. Isn't in it with us. Ask 291 or Blumner. Oscar." So Oscar Blumner also was another modernist painter associated with the circle. And on the left is another version of that photograph. And here are the three on that adventure to that day. Zoller on the left and O'Keeffe in the center and Rosenfeld on the right. Waldo Frank is another cultural critic closely associated with the Stieglitz Circle, and he was a novelist, political activist, historian, a literary critic that wrote for the New Yorker and the New Republic during the 20s and the 30s. And like Rosenfeld, he was rather devoted to Stieglitz and the progress and promotion of the American art scene. In his 1919 publication, Our America, he writes that 291 was, quote, "a religious fact, like all such a miracle." And this was a rather successful publication and generated a good amount of conversation around it. And the book that you're seeing here on the left is in the exhibition, Salvos, an informal book about books and plays. It's published in 1924 by Frank. And it's one of several titles actually in O'Keeffe's library that's associated with Waldo Frank. And if you're interested in other critics and writings on O'Keeffe's work and her response to them, I recommend the book O'Keeffe, Stieglitz, and the Critics by Barbara Buehler-Line. She really delves into this deeply. Buford Delaney. This is an example of group support kind of in making fellow creatives the subject of another work. This is O'Keeffe's portraits of Buford Delaney, and the one on the right, the charcoal, that is on view in the exhibition here. And it's pretty unique in that this is one of only a few representational portraits that O'Keeffe created, and she made 5 portraits of Buford Delaney, who was a noted Harlem Renaissance artist, and 3 are created in charcoal. Delaney was originally from Knoxville, Tennessee, but O'Keeffe meets him in New York, and she wrote, quote, "I first met Buford Delaney when he was posing for Mary Callery. I found that he was a painter and posed for others because he had no heat in his studio and needed to keep warm. He seemed a very special sort of person, so I began drawing him too." Delaney himself had a strong interest in portraiture and often painted fellow artists and friends, though I know no painting that he did of O'Keeffe. He was a really remarkable abstract artist, employing a dramatic use of color, and in addition to portraiture, he created purely abstract works as well as paintings of New York happenings and scenes like you see on the left here, in a modernist style where he takes these complex city scenes and they're depicted as these vibrant abstracted compositions. And the use of color is a real emphasis in his works. O'Keeffe really respected Delaney and his art, and in 1973, in a catalog for a solo exhibition of his, she writes, "He was a very special person, impossible to define. He is a special kind of thought." So also represented in the exhibition are modernist painters Helen Torr and Arthur Dove. And here you're looking at a couple of handmade cards in O'Keeffe's collection from Reds and Dove. So Helen Torr's nickname was Reds because of her red hair. Dove and Tor met in the early 1920s, and they lived together in Huntington, New York from 1924 to 1946. And for several years, they lived on a houseboat. And early on in their relationship, they bought an O'Keeffe painting, which was one of the only works that they had hang in the houseboat. And Dove wrote Stieglitz in 1923. Quote, "The O'Keeffe painting looks better than ever, especially in the boat here by the light of our lantern." And the couple created art together for many years, which they really embraced and depicted nature. Arthur Dove was a key figure in the Stieglitz circle, and O'Keeffe particularly liked him and his work. In a 1962 interview, she said that it was Dove that, quote, "affected her art, who helped her find something of her own." She said that it was his way of thinking. Dove had an earthy, simple quality that led directly to abstraction. His things are very special. I always wish I'd bought more of them. Dove used to paint a lot of small pictures, little landscapes that didn't look particularly distinguished at first, but in them he would get the feel of a particular place so completely that you know you've been there. And that was also another key element of the kind of early American modernists, this essence of place, this sense of place. This watercolor that is on the right is also on display in the exhibition. So O'Keeffe did own some works by Dove, and she purchased this collage on the left, what Dove called one of his things. Soon after he brought it to Stieglitz and showed it, O'Keeffe purchased it. And then she also owned Golden Sun, which is on the right. And this is notable because O'Keeffe didn't really own or display many works by artists in her home. And again, it's evidence for her appreciation above Dove's work above most. Both Dove and O'Keeffe looked to nature for inspiration. They were both interested in sound and its connection to the visual arts. They both worked in similar mediums, responded to each other's work, appreciated each other's work. There's many overlaps. And for a closer look at the connection between their work, I recommend the catalog from the exhibition, Dove and O'Keeffe Circles of Influence by Deborah Bricker-Balkin. Both of their works were subject to Freudian analysis and an emphasis on issues related to gender and the artist's sexuality. Waldo Frank and Paul Rosenfeld were proponents of this discourse, and Rosenfeld played a significant role in pairing and creating a male-female dualism of Dove and O'Keeffe in the early American modern art movement. In a 1921 essay, he describes Dove work in terms of its masculinity and its virility, and O'Keeffe's work as, quote, "gloriously female, accepting fully the nature long denied, spiritualizing her sex, her art." Dove and O'Keeffe's shared sensual approach to abstracting nature was considered key to the unique American modernism that they were promoting, and most critics at the time did note that it was Dove and O'Keeffe that were most serious and successful at tackling abstraction in nature. And Rosenfeld continues to drive this home in his 1924 impactful book, The Port of New York. O'Keeffe, as we know, was not a fan, and she said that she was embarrassed by Rosenfeld's writing about her, writing in a letter in 1922, saying that his articles, quote, "sound so strange and far removed from what I feel of myself. They make me seem like some sort of unearthly creature floating in the air, breathing in clouds for nourishment, when the truth is that I like beefsteak, and I like it rare at that." So here's another comparison of their works. And this comparison of Dove and O'Keeffe continues through their lifetimes, and Stieglitz kind of reinforces this regularly, saying that they're two of a kind. And in this slide, we see, O'Keeffe on the left. In the middle is Dove, and we can see that there's some of their similarities, not in nature abstractions, but in more of these industrial and architectural forms, both also having these sunspots in their paintings. And then on the right, I've included a work by Helen Tor. So Dove's partner, who receives less attention, but is developing a shared significant modern language in her paintings alongside of them at the same time. Tor really was a talented artist in her own right before she meets Dove, studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts under William Merritt Chase and alongside other modern artists, Charles Demuth and Charles Sheeler. However, she's best known for championing her husband's work during her lifetime. And most of her work was not on public view until her death in 1967, when her sister went against her wishes to destroy everything and gave her works to the Heckscher Museum in Huntington, New York, where they have the largest collections of Tor, and they also have the Arthur Dove and Helen Tor cottage. While Dove was supportive and an advocate of Tor's work, he was regularly writing to Stieglitz about her work. They showed her work to Stieglitz many times before he agreed finally in 1933 to show her at an American place at one of his galleries, and he gave her a room during one of Dove's exhibitions. And it's been suggested that O'Keeffe's position as the quintessential American woman modernist in the circle may have created issues for Stieglitz's willingness to show her in the galleries, to show Tor in the galleries. And he definitely expressed concern in writing for her showing alongside Dove, and maybe because of the similarities. O'Keeffe later said that she thought this was a mistake when Tor's work was shown to Stieglitz, and said that, quote, "The things were very small and colorful and in a very reserved fashion, but I thought that they were very good. I think she's a person that would have flowered considerably if she had been given more attention." And she did, O'Keeffe did select some of Tor's paintings for an exhibition of women's work that she organized at the Opportunity Gallery in New York in 1927. And Tor received positive feedback about her works, and she wrote that she was thrilled about it. But her journals and accounts from families really conveyed that more often than not, she struggled with regular rejection from Stieglitz to show her work in his galleries and where she really felt her work should be shown. And she often chose to put her husband Dove's work first, and setting her a painting aside regularly when he had his annual exhibitions at Stieglitz galleries, or when he fell ill. And Tor herself struggled with illness during her lifetime. And then when Dove died in 1946, it seems that she really stopped painting altogether at that time. So another interesting group of creatives that O'Keeffe was familiar with was the Stettheimer sisters. And the Stettheimer sisters, or Stetties as they were known, Caroline or Carrie, Henrietta or Eddie, and Florine regularly hosted salons that included many noted creative members of New York's avant-garde scene. And O'Keeffe said that she met many interesting people through them, and that whenever Florine finished a painting, she would invite everyone over for a party for tea. And so here we see a trio of 3 portraits by Florine, herself and her 2 sisters. On the left is a self-portrait of Florine. In the center is Eddie, and on the far right is Carrie. And all 3 sisters kind of pursued the creative arts in some way, Florine being the visual artist and a poet. And Carrie spent a great deal of time actually managing the family's affairs and the household as host and a caretaker. But over the course of 2 decades, really more than 2 decades, she created this amazing 2-story dollhouse that was a recreation of the Stettheimer house, which includes original works by some of the artists in their circle of friends, including a tiny copy of Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. It's pretty fascinating. Eddie was an author, and she's probably the closest that, out of the sisters, the closest to O'Keeffe, as far as I can tell from the reading of the correspondence. They wrote really about all things daily life and chores, shared friends, struggle in their work and successes. For example, O'Keeffe writes Eddie in August 1929 on the way back from her first summer in New Mexico. I am on the train going back to Stieglitz and in a hurry to get there. I have had 4 months west and it seems to be all that I needed. It has been like the wind and the sun. There doesn't seem to be a crack of the working day or night that wasn't full. I haven't gained an ounce in weight, but feel so alive that I'm apt to crack at any moment. I have frozen in the mountains in rain and hail, slept out under the stars, and cooked and burned on the desert so that riding through Kansas on the train when everyone is wilting about me seems nothing at all for heat. I got a new Ford and I learned to drive it. I even painted and I laughed a great deal. I went to every place that I had time to go. It is my old way of life. You wouldn't like it, and it would seem impossible to you as it does to Stieglitz probably. But it is mine and I like it, and I would just go dead if I couldn't have it. When I saw my exhibition last year, I knew I must get back to some of my own ways or quit. It was mostly all dead for me. Maybe painting will not come out of this. I don't know, but at any rate, I feel alive, and that is something that I enjoy. So this slide shows a painting by Florine Stettheimer, 4 Flowers Under a Canopy, which is in the exhibition, and a detail from one of the cases. It's a postcard from Eddie. And then on the right is a copy of the book Crystal Flowers. It's a book of poetry by Florine, which was published by Eddie after Florine's death and distributed to friends. So, and here you see on the left, there's a poem by Florine, which was published in Crystal Flowers, and another painting, The Cathedrals of Art by Florine. And this is one of 4 large-scale paintings devoted to New York's kind of cultural, social, and economic scenes. Florine was formally trained in Europe and attended the Art Students League as well, but renounced her academic training at some point to paint these more whimsical works, often social scenes and of other artists. She also did set design and designed elaborate frames and furniture. And in her poetry, she often focused on social critiques as well, and satiric portraits of her fellow friends and modernists. She was repeatedly asked to show at Stieglitz galleries by both O'Keeffe and Stieglitz, but declined. And in fact, she really didn't show publicly or sell her work during her lifetime. And so it wasn't really critically received and was thought more to be more ornamental and personal. In 1944, Florine and Carey passed, and Georgia O'Keeffe wrote a 5-page eulogy of Florine in which she said, there were 3 sisters, Eddie, Florine, and Carey. They were all very different, but they were also very much more alike one another than they were like the rest of us. They were close as sisters. One seldom saw one alone without the other. I speak of Florine because she was a painter. She put into visible form in her own way something that they all were, a way of life that is going and cannot happen again, something that has been alive in our city. Anything that I would say about Florine, I would say about her painting. When we saw her, she was always charming and fresh, dressed surprisingly so that she and her paintings were always the same sort of thing, bright and clear. She had all the charm of an old-fashioned Valentine, but she also had the smartness and brightness and newness of today. Florine was special, and her feeling was large and wide and free, but it was also delicate and minute, and her work showed hard work, long, painstaking, hard work. So O'Keeffe clearly respected and had a fondness for the Stettheimer sisters, not unlike her thoughts and feelings that she shared towards the other artists featured in the exhibition. So that's a wrap. Again, I just want to thank you for joining us today and invite you and hope that you can come by the library to take a closer look at the collection representing O'Keeffe's Creative Circle and their collective effort to shape American modernism in the early 20th century. And this slide is the link where you can find some more information about the exhibition, how to schedule an appointment or a time to visit us. That's our email and our phone number.
Thank you so much, Liz. This is so fascinating to see these materials, but also to hear you quote so many letters and other sources that really illustrates this period of time and these connections in the words that were said by the actual individuals. It brings such life to this idea. So thank you so much for that. And for the rest of our time, we're gonna go through some questions from the audience and do some more exploration of the themes that Liz discussed here. So let's take a look at our Q&A. We have a question from Linda, which is interesting, and perhaps there's some evidence in the correspondence that you've seen, Liz. All these folks who were visiting Georgia O'Keeffe in her home, whether it was in St. George or in Abiquiu, people like Rosenfeld and Frank, do you know if they ever paid room and board or anything to stay with O'Keeffe, or is this kind of like a more casual, people could come and go and just enjoy their time at the homes?
Yeah, I do not know of any of them paying for room and board. And as they gathered in all the places in their apartment and in New York and coming by the galleries and staying at Lake George. No, I don't know that that was ever a thing.
Okay. Let's see. Another question that I'm really curious about. So in your process of putting this together, this exhibition using all these different materials, you're envisioning a social network, something that was really extensive and really complex, as the Stieglitz Circle. And I'd love to know more about how these literal archived objects helped you to visualize these relationships and how the combination of these materials communicates to the public something as complicated as how people interact with one another and how that moment in time is represented by these exchanges.
Yeah, I think, I have over the years had the opportunity to really read a lot of correspondence between all of these individuals and a lot of the criticism. And, I do think like it is complex with the limited space that we have to bring out all of the wealth of materials that we have in our collections to do this. So it is definitely difficult to represent these all because there is so much, that many of the relationships go over years and are part of complex circles. So that's why I do think like, I definitely feel as the librarian in me, I encourage people to, explore. There's full exhibitions developed, about some of these individual relationships like Dove and O'Keeffe and, getting into the critics and O'Keeffe and Stieglitz is so deep of a conversation. And really, I do recommend people, if they're interested, delve in further on any of those. And there's several other, books and paintings represented that like it didn't even have the opportunity to really talk about here. John Marin and Hartley, Marston Hartley. So it is really hard to do in a small space. I think it's wonderful to have opportunities like this to just at least pique people's interest in other members of the circle.
Thank you so much. And it's just so fascinating that you're able to pull together these items like handwritten cards and inscriptions in books and actual paintings and drawings. Could you talk a little bit about what the process was like for you to curate this collection and how you decided what objects would represent each person. And I know you talked a little bit about the space limitations, but were there any other aspects that really inspired you to select the things that you did?
I think that for me, some of the, trying to pick books that really represented, kind of this focus on each other as subject. So there are other pieces in there that are, exhibition and gallery pieces that are about, people making the other artists in the circles, subject or portrait of their work. So that was kind of a key point for me. While there are many books that O'Keeffe collected, not all of them kind of had that focus, and that was a really important kind of part for me in looking at the circle, was just really how they, like any artist groups and circles, how important that community is in reinforcing the vision and kind of explaining the work, even though, like I said, it was complex for O'Keeffe, and while she may have benefited from some of it, it was also like her interpretation of her work she had to fight against also her whole lifetime. So I think that was a goal for me, was to kind of highlight a couple of those critics who really, were central in that discourse. There are so many other fascinating ones. Like, she has a huge, wonderful collection of Sherwood Anderson books, and we have a great deal of material in the archive related to him. So there's other people that I hope to delve into in the future and share.
Interesting. Thank you. We have a question from Ryan, and I think, and I'll add a little bit more to the question, to ask you. So the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, it's very unique in that we have the actual physical museum space where Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings are displayed. And then we have the library and archive where this exhibition that you've been discussing is. And then we have the home and studio and abacus. We have all these different pieces that work together to help illustrate the life and legacy of Georgia O'Keeffe. And so could you tell us a little bit about the library and archive specifically, how it's different from the museum, how it serves as a resource for the museum, but also for anyone who has an interest in researching Georgia O'Keeffe, and what the collection comprises, what comprises the collection?
Sure. Yeah. So as far as kind of our exhibition goals, we are often looking to highlight material, like I said, from the library and archive, but kind of look at things that maybe haven't found their way into the museum yet. So it kind of is a test bed in some ways for our curatorial and programming staff to look at a range of different types of topics and subjects and materials. And when we're bringing things out of the archive and the special collections, we're really looking to kind of pique the interest of almost our internal audience. So our staff here at the museum, which is pretty typical for a museum library, is usually your primary audience is your internal staff, your museum staff. And so that is one of our main goals in like how we think about putting things on view in the space. And a lot of people are coming to access primary resources. So they are coming to read and discover Georgia O'Keeffe's correspondence and correspondence of her colleagues and family. That's a big part of our collection, and also looking at our special collection. So O'Keeffe's huge book collection that she has that is in the library, and photographs of O'Keeffe. So like, I do think that while it's not all O'Keeffe centric, some people are really looking into other people that surrounded O'Keeffe that we have archives for. That is the main emphasis. And we certainly try to, we are constantly supporting projects that are not of the O'Keeffe Museum, but exhibitions, films, plays, writings, and publications that are happening elsewhere. So like I said, we are open to the public pretty much daily during the week in the mornings. And we encourage people to come by and see the materials, and also and access the primary resources. And we're more than happy to help you don't have to have a research project to come by and be working on a major publication. You can just come and access and read some of the primary materials and the correspondence and photographs without a big project. We're happy to point people in different directions, and there's always things on display that we can kind of give as examples of that.
That's so great to know that you don't necessarily have to be writing a book or a script of some kind, that these materials are actually available to the public. Could you walk us through just a little bit what a research appointment might look like for those who are in the audience who maybe have never accessed a research library? What would the process be to make an appointment and to go through that process to actually see some of these things in person?
There's just a form that you, in that link, that you can go to and make a request for a time to come in. We do have, so the archives have finding aids, which are kind of like guides to the different collections. Those are the databases are all online, and you can find them at that link that is on the slide there. So you can look through, or, you can just say, that you would, generally like to see some O'Keeffe correspondence, and we will respond back to you and kind of help you negotiate that. And, one popular set of correspondence we have is O'Keeffe to Stieglitz. And so we will pull different representations of the collection, the photos, the archives when people come. Also, we do have a fair amount of artists that come and are reading selections of her artists or her archives. A lot of the letters we do have transcribed. So for people who really want to move through them and have difficulty reading O'Keeffe's handwriting, we do have that option. The oral histories, people who knew O'Keeffe, are really popular, and we have those digitized as well as transcripts of those. Artists really enjoy looking at the artist materials that are on display, her brushes we have in some of the casework, some of her color chips and samples, examples of her drawings, preliminary drawings, and kind of materials that were from her rock and bone collection. So we pull out all of those materials as well to just kind of give people a glimpse at the breadth of the collections that one of your questions was about, just kind of like, how do we work all of it together? There's a little bit of everything in there for people's interests.
Great. So yes, just to repeat, for those who are here, you can actually make an appointment and see these documents or materials yourself. And there's more information about how to do that, as Liz explained, on our website. Another thing that we will include when we send our follow-up email is a suggested reading that was put together that corresponds with this exhibition for deeper dives into the subjects represented here. We have another question about collecting. So we know, of course, the museum collects Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings, and just the fact that there is a collection at the Library and Archives suggests that you're continuing to grow it. Is there more you can talk about as far as what's selected to complement the collection, as far as resources about modernism or other artists? What other kinds of resources do you choose to make a complete picture told through these objects?
Yeah, so our library collection for research purposes was kind of born out of the original goals of the Research Center's fellowship program, which was looking at, Georgia O'Keeffe and modernism more broadly. So the, literary, performing, and visual arts. So our collection, our regular book general collection is kind of around, and we are continued to collect in that area to support that collection, and those do not circulate to the public, but the public is welcome to come in and use it as a research collection. We certainly, I think this exhibition is a good example of how we are trying to collect materials that provide some context give a broader understanding of O'Keeffe in, the places that she lived, the ways that she worked, the people that she associated with. And our goal really here was to we're often kind of trying to break some myths in our exhibitions and programming out of the library. So this kind of was like to say, she was not isolated and, a hermit and divorced in some ways that she sometimes says she's kind of dismissive in her later life of, the boys in New York and what they were doing, but she was very much aware of the world and was very much a part of it, especially in the early years. And so collecting in these areas that help us kind of build these stories and share these stories is one of our big emphasis. And having this material in the library and archive gives us an opportunity to kind of when people come in and tour, because you can just come in to tour the casework in the libraries. You can also pay to have a extension of a private tour in the museum, the library and archive. If there's 6 or more of you, you can get a guided tour of the library and archive, and someone will take you through all the materials. And really, it's a good opportunity for us to test like an understanding of what do people know of this broader circle of artists and writers, and what is the interest level. And so it's really a wonderful place to kind of explore this material. And the library itself is a much more intimate viewing with some of the works. So it's definitely a different experience coming in and seeing the materials there. And that's just how we will continue to probably collect to like tell these broader stories and kind of widen kind of the understanding of her artistic practice, her circle, her connection with place.
Thank you so much. And kind of an extension of that question, all these wonderful materials, all of these ways that they're filling in these gaps about Georgia O'Keeffe and her life and the people she spent time with. How do you go about protecting these things so that they survive the test of time? Is there anything you can share about the way that you care for these objects in the archive and how the display, how the choices you make in displaying them are impacted by wanting to preserve them for future use?
Sure. So the library and archive is an environmentally controlled space, both the reading room and our kind of collection storage, where we page most of so when you come in, you will not see the archives. There are archival boxes all sitting on the shelves. These are all paged from a collection storage space. So controlling the temperature and humidity, putting them in acid-free boxes, and we've done some kind of workshops on these before, just like showing how we do what we do. That is one of the ways. We right now have a grant from the National Endowment of Humanities grant for preserving O'Keeffe's personal library. So we're actually bringing her books down from a closed small room in the Abiquiu property to secured storage in the library reading room. So that is going to help them in terms of getting them into an environmentally controlled area where we can make them accessible to the public, because they currently are not accessible as they are at the Abiquiu book room. So that is one of the ways that we're treating it, and we're going through the materials and we identify anything that needs like conservation or additional preservation care. We're really lucky to have a wonderful staff here that are working on that. Bonnie Stewart in the library and Dale Cronkite in conservation. And so we really do have a great opportunity to kind of like protect and share our collections with great facilities and staff.
That's great. And that's something that I really enjoy about these conversations and these mornings with O'Keeffe programs, is that we're able to actually meet the people behind the scenes who are doing all of this work. And so, as you mentioned, Bonnie and Dale and all these amazing people who make these programs and this information accessible and possible. And so it's always really great to hear straight from you what your work is like and the other projects that you have. We have a couple more minutes and we have a few questions. We can pivot a little bit back to O'Keeffe's collecting practice. So we know about your collecting practice for the library and archive, but you mentioned a few times about how Georgia O'Keeffe wasn't displaying a whole lot of artwork from other artists in her home, but we do know that she did, obtain artworks from other people. So this is a bit of a two-parted question. We have one person who wonders if we know anything from the correspondence about whether artworks, for instance, from Dove were purchased, or if there were trades of artwork, or what that actual kind of transaction might have looked like through these relationships with other artists. And we also had a question about whether we know if O'Keeffe purchased or traded or somehow obtained work also from Helen Tor.
I don't know of Tor's works. She does use the word in the correspondence and in interviews, purchased. She, as far as like Stieglitz, and when Stieglitz was involved and how he was managing some of the works, and his records are not super tight. As far as that goes, those things definitely were kind of loaned out for periods of time, and probably arrangements were made for, different scales of price. But and actually, I did read that she owned maybe a set of works that maybe still not known actually where they are, Dove works, so that she had the two works that I showed, that collage, or his things that he called them, and the oil painting, but there may have been a couple of other works that are not known where they are right now. So there may have been more Dove. Tor, I don't know about. So when Stieglitz passed, also O'Keeffe was responsible for really dealing with his large collection of work that he had, both photographs, but like all the American modernists that were represented in his galleries. And it took her several years to kind of place those in museums across the country. And she didn't really retain a lot of it. She really made that her business to get his work out publicly in the same way she had that intent with her work. And she really didn't, she lived with her own work that she would rotate on the walls. And she had a Calder mobile. She had a couple of masks that were from Africa that she really said were important in terms of her, ideals in terms of aesthetic, and then a couple of these doves. And there was, I think, O'Keeffe's or a Stieglitz Icy Night. His photograph also was in her studio for a long period of time. But yeah, in general, she preferred a white wall, is what she was known to say. But yeah, she did specifically say that she purchased the works. And we know that like from other, like she did collect in her book collecting. She certainly was intentional in purchasing her books, especially her kind of large, amazing prints on, works from China and Japan that she found quite beautiful. And so we have a lot of intentional collecting in that area that I'm more familiar with in terms of her library and archives. And she was really intentional with what she was keeping in terms of managing her records and her papers. Again, I think she learned a lot from the period of time that she was managing Alfred Stieglitz's estate. I mean, she was very particular, even when she was placing his works of art and his photographs in different repositories across the country. She developed these kind of guidelines on the care and display that went with the works, which was not common at the time to, have works being given to places with this very intentional how they should be treated.
Thank you. And that just reveals so much about her and her practices. And I think that it's really interesting to know that the word purchase was used in these exchanges when referring to acquiring these artists' work for herself. We have time for one more quick question, and what I would like to ask you is there a particular object or something in the exhibition that was really striking to you, or do you have a favorite piece or something that was really special when you were putting this collection together that sticks out to you?
I think that all of them had this like were very special. I think the works of art and selecting them were interesting and a challenge because most of them really haven't been shown in our galleries. And so there was an opportunity to really, for me, I do love to dig into the research and really look at what those relationships were. I really did enjoy reading the correspondence between Eddie Stettheimer and understanding, the relationship between O'Keeffe and the Stettheimer sisters and learning more about them. I mean, I think that, Eddie Stettheimer was one of the few people that O'Keeffe was corresponding with, like when she was at Lake George in the summers, because she was there with Stieglitz. So we have a lot of rich correspondence and understanding of what she's working on and what her life is like and what she's feeling when she's corresponding, when she's living away from Stieglitz. But when they're together, there is less correspondence, and really she let him kind of speak for her in many ways and say her hellos to people when they were at Lake George. So she wasn't sending a lot of letters to anyone other than Eddie. So was a great opportunity to kind of learn more about, O'Keeffe's time at Lake George. So that was kind of a nice group of correspondence that I hadn't read before. And reading through her multiple drafts of the eulogy and handwritten notes about that, and just seeing her connection to these different people and what they meant, kind of like learning what she was writing at that time to others about being in the group in the like early 1920s, but then also kind of understanding what she was saying later in life in different interviews and writing in catalogs for retrospective shows and things like that. So that was really interesting just to kind of look at the parallels and then the ways that she was looking back and reflecting and seeing it maybe different.
Absolutely. Terrific. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I usually like to wrap up our MWalks with a note from someone in the audience. Tom said, "Thanks you, Liz, for a fascinating presentation." And I agree. Thank you so much for sharing more about the circle and acquainting us more with some of these contacts and how these relationships are illustrated in this exhibition that you've curated. And just to remind everyone here that we are located here in Santa Fe and that you can make an appointment to do some research of your own. You can visit our website and we will send some more information to you after the talk wraps up with some more tips on how to do that. So Liz, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Just come visit us.
Perfect. Yes, come visit. And thank you all again. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you'll join us for the next Mornings with O'Keeffe program. Thank you.
Thank you.